Hi there, I'm Mrs. Lopez, and I'm going to teach you some theory and how to sight read through a series of short music videos. We're going to call them podcasts. This is podcast 1A, and this is a vocabulary and introduction to notes and rest lesson. Before we can really start reading music, we have to share a common vocabulary. Some of the terms that I'm going to use as we go along are musical terms that all musicians use, and you're going to need to understand what they mean when I say them. So let's start with a few vocabulary terms. The first vocabulary term is time signature. A time signature is a set of numbers. It looks like a fraction, and there will always be one at the beginning of your music. Some of the most commonly used time signatures are 4/4, 3/4, and 2/4, and we're going to talk more about them later. Let's go on. The next term is bar line. A bar line is a vertical line up and down, used to group sets of beats. When we read and write rhythm, we group the notes in sets, so we need something to show the beginning and ending of each set, and musicians use bar lines for this purpose. So there's some bar lines, up and down, vertical lines. Who remembers what that's called? Yeah, it's a time signature. Okay, let's go on. A measure. A measure is the area between two bar lines. It also is at the very, very beginning. They don't start with a bar line, but that very first area is also called a measure. So there's 4 measures. And what are those called? This one over here is time signature, and then these vertical lines are called bar lines. Okay, double bar line. There are several ways to show the end of a piece of music. We're going to start with the double bar line, the one that tells you that the music is over and you should stop. There's actually a couple different double bar lines, but this is the one that tells us it's the end. Notice that it has a thin line and then a thicker line. That's the double bar line that tells the musician you can stop now. Okay, so do we remember what all of those things are called? We have the time signature, we have this area which is known as a measure, and then the measures are separated by bar lines, and of course the very end is the double bar line. Okay, let's go on. Notes and rests, the moment you've all been waiting for. A note is a symbol used in music that tells us to make sound. Some notes are worth more than other notes, meaning some notes are longer and some are shorter, and they look different so we can tell which one is which. A rest is the opposite. It's a symbol used in music that tells us to be silent, and some rests are worth more than other rests. Before we look at notes and rests, though, we've got to go back and revisit time signatures and talk a little bit more about what they mean. That's going to be important. So remember, time signatures are numbers that look like a fraction at the beginning of your music, and there's the most common ones, 4/4, 3/4, and 2/4. The top number in the time signature tells you how many beats will be in each group. Remember, musicians call a group a measure. Musicians count beats using numbers, so if there's a 4 on the top, that tells us to count up to 4 and then start over. We will be counting in 4 to begin with because 4/4 is the most common time signature. It's actually even referred to as common time. Okay, the whole note. This is a whole note. Notice that it looks like an oval. It takes up a whole measure in 4/4. Whole note, whole measure. That'll help you remember that term. A whole note is a long note, and you make one long sound for 4 counts or 4 beats. So here's a series of whole notes. As you can see, there's 4 ovals there, and we need more than that. We need to have a time signature. We need to separate them with bar lines, and of course we need to have our double bar line at the end to let everybody know it's time to stop. Remember, I said a whole note is a long note. You make one long sound for 4 counts or 4 beats. We're just going to count them though, and we're going to start counting each one when we get to the number 1. Very important that you learn to tap your hand on your leg while you're counting. When we do sight reading, it's really important that you show where the beats are. Okay, so I'm going to count to 4, and then you can start counting along with me. Here I go. 1, 2, 3, begin. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's go on. The whole rest looks like this. Notice that it kind of looks like an upside down hat. Some people think about it like a hole in the ground. I always think about it as being very, very heavy, so heavy that it sinks down under the ground level, under the line, because it is worth 4 counts or 4 beats, and that's the most beats you can have in 4/4. But remember, a rest tells you you're going to be silent for those 4 beats. So we are going to count 4 beats for a rest, but you have to remember that when you see one in your music, it means to stay silent for that length of time. So let's combine some whole notes and some whole rests in 4/4 time. There they are, 4 counts of sound, 4 counts of silence, 4 counts of sound, and 4 counts of silence. Remember, each one begins on count 1. Pat your leg along with me. I'll give us 4 counts to start off, and then we'll start. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hope you noticed I tried to count a little more quietly when I had the rest than when I was making the sound for the notes. Okay, let's go on to the half note. A half note kind of looks like a whole note. It's a white oval, but it has a stem on it. A stem, just like a flower has a stem. It can look like that, and it can also be what some people think of as upside down. The stem can point up, or the stem can point down. It doesn't really matter. They're each the same. It's worth half of a whole note. So if you remember, the whole note in 4/4 time takes up the whole measure, which is 4 counts. So if this is worth half of that, it's only going to be worth 2 counts or 2 beats. So here's a series of half notes. Notice that some of them have that up stem and some of them have a down stem. But each one is worth 2 counts. We want to still count up to 4 because we're in 4/4. So we're going to say 1, 2 on the first one, and then 3, 4 on the second one. Okay, I'll count us 4 counts, and then let's all count it together. 1, 2, ready, begin. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's go on to the half rest. A half rest looks like a whole note, a whole rest turned upside down. Remember, this one's not quite as heavy. It's only going to be 2 counts, so it's light enough to keep on floating. The whole rest is so heavy, 4 counts, that it sinks down underneath the line. The half rest is 2 counts of silence. Don't forget, when you're singing, you don't make sound on a rest of any kind. So let's combine some half notes and half rests. All right, we've got them there, some up stems, some down stems, up stems, down stems, and some rests put in our bar lines and our double bar line at the end. All right, here we go. 1, 2, pat your leg, 3, and let's begin. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good job. All right, quarter note. This is a quarter note, kind of like a half note, only it's colored in. But just like the half note, it can be a stem up or a stem down. Doesn't matter. It is worth a quarter of a whole note. Quarter note, quarter of a whole note. Whole note, whole measure, right? So a whole note's 4 counts, the whole measure. A quarter of 4 is 1. So the quarter note is going to be worth just 1 count, which means that each note is going to be a new count. So count it along with me. Here we go. I'll give you 4 and then we begin. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, quarter rest. There it is, the quarter rest. Just like the quarter note, it's worth one count or one beat, but it is one beat of silence. So let's combine some quarter notes and some quarter rests. All right, here we go. Ready? 1, 2, ready, tap, and count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Eighth note, everybody's favorite. There are a lot of ways to write eighth notes, so don't get confused. They can look like that with a little flag on them. They can be upside down with a flag on them. They can have a connection, which is called a beam, 2 eighth notes with a beam, or even more than 2. Or they can be upside down with the beam. So that's all the different ways of writing eighth notes. Don't get confused. If they have one flag or one beam, they are eighth notes. Understanding eighth notes can be tricky because 2 eighth notes equal a quarter note, just like 2/8 of anything equal a quarter or a fourth of it. So there's 2 eighth notes, they equal 1 quarter note. And we already know that the quarter note is worth 1 count. That means the 2 eighth notes together are worth 1 count. So by themselves, they're worth less than 1 count. They're worth a half of the count each. So this one would be the first half of the count, and that one would be the second half of the count. When we split a beat in half, most musicians call the first half of the beat 1 or 2 or whatever beat we're on. It could be beat 6, beat 5, however we're counting. The first half of the beat is the number part of the beat. And the second half of the beat we say and. All right, so let's try counting some eighth notes. Now, when you're tapping on your leg, you want to very carefully have a downbeat on the tap and put your hand out to the side on the and part, the second half of the beat. So it would be 1 and 2 and so on. And that's why we've been tapping so slowly, because eighth notes can get really, really fast and tricky. So here we go. Let's try counting our way through these 2 measures of eighth notes. I'll give you 4 and then we start. 1, 2, ready, begin. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, I hope you were able to keep up. The eighth rest means to rest for a half a count. So you have to have 2 of them to make a beat, or you have to have 1 of them and an eighth note to make a beat. It's very small little rest you'll see in your music. So let's take a look at some ways of combining eighth notes and eighth rests. Here we have a series of eighth note rests, then some eighth notes thrown in there. Single eighth note, eighth rest, single eighth note, eighth rest, 2 eighth notes, and then 2 eighth rests in a row. And remember, usually when we're singing eighth rests in sight reading, I like for my students to say shh when we have them. But for counting purposes, we're going to count each one. So let's see if we can do this. 1 and 2 and ready and begin. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. How'd you make out? I hope everybody did a good job. I hope you all understood it. But if you didn't understand something, please raise your hand now and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. See you next time.